The Majority Report with Sam Seder, where every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday, Tuesday, Casual Tuesday, Wednesday, Casual Hump Day, Thursday, Casual Thurs, that's what we call it, and Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, December 29th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live to tape. Steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is the second to last show of the year for the Majority Report.
Well, no, it's the last. It's the last.
Oh,
it's
shoot.
Friday.
Yeah.
Saturday's the 30th.
That's why.
Sunday's the 31st.
Again, Emma, she's a disembodied voice. Matt.
Oh.
We'll get her into, yes.
I'm here.
That was my conscience.
Don't worry.
Ladies and gentlemen, correcting my mistake. Correct, Emma Vigland.
Yes.
It is the final Majority Report of the year. It is the second to last of our famous Best Ofs from 2022 that actually, or 2023, that are actually so great they bleed into 2024 on New Year's Day. But today is the last show of the year, and we have got a great one for you. It is an appearance on the show. Jane McAlevey, who's been on like maybe 2 or 3 times this year. And you may have read a profile that was done of her. I think it was in the New Yorker, and it let us know that she's not going to be with us. We don't know how much longer. She is ill and is her time is limited. We had an opportunity to talk to her since that piece came out. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk to her again. She's been an incredible teacher of myself over the years. I think we started interviewing her maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, maybe a little bit more. And she's been in
Shortcuts was her.
She's absolutely. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to just say No Shortcuts was her sort of big book that I remember.
Yeah.
As like organizing sort of a great place to start if you're like wanting to democratize your workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. She's such an essential voice when it comes to anything related to labor. And I guess I'll just roll right into
Please.
Yeah, the second interview that we'll be doing that we did do for our Best Ofs with Camille Ray, who is a mother of a trans son named Leon. And this is just a great interview because getting to talk to her about her family's decision, the very difficult decision to leave Texas to flee the anti-trans bills that were being passed there and move to Maryland, and all that goes into that kind of choice and all of the obstacles and leaving family behind and everything that she and her family were forced to do in order to get health care for her child. It really is just absolutely astounding. So I loved getting to talk to Camille and wanted to share that interview with you again.
Yeah, I was, I remember tweeting out like after this, we were proud. I was really proud that I produced this because the conversation about, these families and like the insinuations made about parents of trans kids are disgusting and don't withstand a moment's scrutiny when you actually hear one of the parents that has been with these kids.
Exactly. Oh, we put you down because of the coffin.
Yeah, exactly. It's also, the conversation can get abstract pretty easily, and to hear the implications for a family is really important. We should say that Jane McAlevey, this is the interview from May of 2023, and Camille Ray first aired on in June, end of June in 2023. And then we try and add a little levity, but not really. It was an emotional thing for me. In the beginning of the year, back in January, Tim Pool had revealed that I would go to Tim often for for just to have rap sessions.
Right, about your career.
About my career.
Sorry, your failing career.
My failing career, and also, frankly, and Tim hasn't revealed this, but also, I go for advice about dating and relationship advice from Tim Pool, and he revealed this, which is okay, and said that I had talked to him about my feeling upset about my role on Bob's Burgers diminishing, the Hugo role. I have others, but they're not as I do old men on there, but they're not as meaty as Hugo. And Hugo was going to be my big ticket to ride. Everybody knew that. And I spoke to Jon Benjamin, who supposedly plays Bob on that show, Bob's Burgers. And he called in and we talked about it a little bit. And I've yet to validate that it's actually him who plays that on Bob's Burgers, but supposedly. And so he spoke to me about that because there was sort of like a triangle of friendship there. So, folks, enjoy this interview with Jane McAlevey. You learn something every time. And the interview with Camille Ray to understand sort of like the implications of these laws on real people's lives. And then Jon Benjamin and I discussing the whole Tim thing. So, folks, enjoy this show. We'll be back Monday with our final best of 2023. And see you then. It is a real pleasure to welcome back to the program Jane McAlevey. She is Senior Policy Fellow at the University of California, Berkeley's Labor Center, co-author of Rules to Win By, Power and Participation in Union Negotiations. She co-wrote it with Abby Lawler. Jane, welcome back to the program. As I realize this, I think it's possible that you're one of our most frequent guests that we've had over the past 3 or 4 years. And we generally don't have folks on too much, in a row. A lot of books to get to, a lot of different people. But this has been, I think, at least in my lifetime, I think, well, I shouldn't say that, but because that's a little bit longer than maybe I want to. But certainly within the past, I feel like 3 decades, the most active union labor period that we have experienced. And so many people have told us that, talking to you has been so helpful in when they try and unionize their workplaces. And you have basically written a sequel to your organizing book, No Shortcuts. Just remind us what No Shortcuts was about, and then we can sort of set up what this sort of next step is.
Yeah, great. First of all, I'm flattered, honestly, that I'm here so often because I think it's a show. So No Shortcuts, there's there's 4 books in 10 years, right? And they were all the first one was an accident, and then the rest of them almost were, except for this one. So this one's a sequel to No Shortcuts, and No Shortcuts was my late in life PhD dissertation. But the evidence for it and all the knowledge for it, of course, came from workers in the field. That's where I've learned everything, is fight by fight in the field. So No Shortcuts basically said, hey, there's a lot of talk out there about organizing. And the truth is, in my observation, most people who talk about organizing aren't actually doing organizing, which I define. The whole book is about defining what's mobilizing, which is when you're focused on the people who already agree with you, but you're trying to get them off the couch to take action, versus organizing, which is when we're actually focused every single day on people who are mostly undecided about whether or not they self-identify with any movement, and often, as I argue, initially think they're opposed to whatever their cause is, in this case, a trade union. And that's in part because of the extraordinary multi-billionaire effort to demonize what a trade union has been for so long. So what I was trying to met out was that in the era I came in as a trade union organizer full-time, as a senior organizer at the National American Federation of Labor, Congress of Industrial Organizations in 1996. We're all getting old here. In 1996, when I began, there's a lot of talk that we were trying to do organizing, that we're going to reorganize the labor movement. And in short, my analysis of my time with both the National AFL-CIO and then as National Deputy Director at the SEIU with both of them in that first decade was, in fact, we weren't organizing. We were doing something called mobilizing. We were relying on a small number of workers who already agreed with us. And then the narrative became that organizing didn't work. And that's what made me sit down kind of angry to write a book that said, let's get clear about what we need more of, which is organizing. And when we actually do it correctly, those of us who do it, we just keep winning. And if we take these shortcuts, which is mobilizing and getting a telegenic worker in front of a TV camera, that ain't organizing. And you simply can't get to the kind of supermajorities that we saw on the LA picket lines recently in Los Angeles, right, with the educators. I think we're about to see on the WGA lines today, the Writers Guild, on the Oakland education strike lines that begin Thursday or tomorrow, actually, right? And you're right, there's a lot happening. So no shortcuts really says, wait a minute. It's a challenge to the national trade union movement. And it says, hell yes, organizing works. You've abandoned it. You've abandoned workers as the central agents in our own salvation. And you've taken these shortcuts about shareholder damage and crashing stock prices and clever things that actually don't work. And you're calling them organizing. So what I was trying to really parse out for people is organizing does still work. It's about base expansion. Are we bringing people into the movement who previously weren't involved? Then you get to mobilize them. Then you get to put them out on a picket line or help them understand, who they might want to vote for in an election. But the first step is rebuilding a base of people in this country in supermajority levels that lead to the kind of victory that we saw in Los Angeles with a 30% raise off of a 3-day strike recently, right? A 30% raise. That's the kind of gains that workers need in this country after taking it in the neck from, everything that's been going wrong for 50 years.
Someone had asked me, it was a while back, someone had asked me about your book, and I had summed it up in borrowing a phrase I had heard quite a bit in terms of when you're supposed to hire a lawyer. But it was basically the best time to organize is when you don't need to have the organization yet. Like you can't mobilize unless you have already done the work prior to that and begun to organize. And I don't know if it's all been since the last time that you've been on, but we have talked to a couple of the people who were in in Buffalo organizing the Starbucks people. We've talked to people in Trader Joe's. We have talked to musicians and teachers. And the one thing that I think really at least in part to your work, is that people started to understand they need to start to build relationships way before they can mobilize anything. And then one of the things that I have subsequently learned too is we just had on organizers from Starbucks when Schultz was talking was this gap between the unionization and the actual first contract, and that is in many ways almost as perilous a time, if not more so, than the run up to the unionization effort in the first place, because the desire to break the union does not end prior to the election. It goes through particularly until that first contract. Tell us about that dynamic, because I think in your book you cite something like 52% of new unions do not have a contract within the first year. Just tell us about that dynamic.
Yeah, and we're seeing it actually in the Starbucks campaign in a couple of headlines in the last week. So yes, this is why organizers say the organizing never stops, right? It can't stop. So under United States labor law, which I think I've probably said before, I prefer to call boss law or employer law, because the idea that it works for workers is a bit of a myth. But under the National Labor Relations Act and under sort of currently settled law, most people in this country think that when workers vote to form a union, they just go right into contract negotiations, and somehow there's some obligation on the part of the employer to sit down and be fair and start negotiating, right? Hey, a majority of workers voted for the union. No. No. And not only does that not happen, but under labor law, at the 12-month mark, if your union has been certified, and in the case of some of the Starbucks elections, the early ones, they got certified. If your union unlike Amazon, contrast that, right? There's no certification still of that election. Amazon's taking a different approach. They're going to fight even saying that there is a union. So what I'm about to say doesn't even really apply to them. At Starbucks, the unions got certified by the National Labor Relations Board. This was a valid election, yada, yada. Okay. What happens under labor law is that if there is not a union contract negotiated within 12 months, the employer, though officially the law says workers, may then file for what's called a decertification of the union. In essence, the original intent was, if it's not getting you anything, feel free to throw the union out. But what that has become for all of our lifetimes has become the second chance to destroy the worker organization. Not only has it become that, it's like they're totally motivated by that, right? They understand all they have to do is drag this crap out for 12 more months, and they can go inspire would be the polite word, because officially the employer can't do this. In every campaign where I've ever faced such a hurdle, which you might imagine I have, having gone up against some of the biggest private sector employers in the healthcare industry, who will spend as much money as Amazon, to bust the union. We know exactly how it happens, right? You have to get 30% of workers to say, I'm dissatisfied with the union. The employer runs a message saying, hey, it's been 12 months and you don't have a contract yet. Why don't you throw the bums out and we'll cut a better deal with you? Well, only reason there isn't a contract in that 12 months is because the employer kept the union busters there and just kept running divide and conquer. They go form a little committee. This goes back to something I covered in my previous book. This goes back to 1939 in the Sears and Roebuck Corporation. This is actually where they figured it out. They collect the bosses at Sears and Roebuck, a titan in the 1930s, went to the University of Chicago, where they were headquarters, right? The Sears Tower, Sears World Headquarters was in Chicago. They went to the University of Chicago Behavioral Psychology Department, which was very preeminent at the time. Right? There was a whole bunch of interesting people there, but for different reasons. Famously, behavioral sociology and behavioral psych department. And they actually hired them. And this is the beginning of official union busting. And what they came to was, as long as they got a workers committee, if they could find a few workers to call up the workers committee to throw the union out, they stood a better chance of winning. So they officially never look like it's them. And under labor law, they can't officially, the boss, be the one who does it. But in my lifetime, they will pull a bunch of workers into a broom closet in a hospital. And after dragging things out for 12 months after the workers won, they will say, hey, this is pretty awful. Why don't we just get rid of it and go back to the way things were? And it's only if you've done the organizing work. It's only if you've identified the correct leaders, the real worker leaders. It's only if you've done a good job up front as union organizers of telling this to workers from day one. And that's where some people take shortcuts and don't do it, right? In my life experience, I say from day one, by the way, as soon as you win the election, get ready for the hard part of the fight, because that's what's going to come next, is actually winning your contract. So everything that we do to build our power in the lead up to a National Labor Relations Board election has to set us up to then go for the next round of the fight. And we better be in a great position to force the employer's hand. So yeah, that's how it works. It's an extraordinarily, that's why I call it boss law or employer law. You call it labor laws. A stretch.
What do you say when you see major corporations like Amazon and Starbucks union busting just because they can, because they are these major corporations that can just eat the fees. It's nothing to them. It's the cost of doing business. In fact, it's actually, in the long term, much more beneficial for them to send a message for their corporate profits than it is to abide by the letter of the law. Like, how do you communicate that to organizers that this might happen and we're in this for the long fight?
Yeah. I mean, look, it is part of why, every couple of years after running some campaigns, I just decide, and watching who's doing good work, I just decide to write another book. Because one, I want to keep showing that despite all these barriers, actually workers win, right? When we do our work right, we still can win. That's been the point of every single one of the books. So it starts with being transparent, clear, and open from the minute you're talking to workers. There's going to be a hard fight. You frame the choice. You can either choose to live with undignified pay, no respect, bad scheduling, no staff, not enough people, and feel like you left, every day when you leave the workplace, you were in a combat zone and you're so exhausted and freaked out, like nurses and healthcare workers are, that they feel like they go into PTSD every day when they leave their shift, right? So you got to frame the choice. You can either choose to do nothing, don't form a union, and keep living with the horrible conditions you're living in, or you can choose to do something about it and form a union. But I want to be honest, from day one, it's going to take a hell of a lot of work. And the more honest you are, the more you treat workers with they have big brains. They actually are smart people, right? They run the economy really indirectly. So it's like the more you acknowledge up front what it's really going to take to win, that's what staves off the ability for the employer to run a decertification at the 12-month mark, right? It's when it's a surprise. It's when, not effective unions will not tell all these things are going to happen. It's like, we do what's called inoculation and transparency. You've just got to be clear from day one that there is going to be a hell of a fight to come. And the first thing we have to do is get strong enough inside this workplace to win the vote. And the minute we win the vote, in the method I write about and talk about in No Shortcuts, and certainly in the new book, and in all of them, and what I practice is the minute we've won that vote, we're going to start to build the support team around those workers. So we're going to have the workers begin to chart their connections to the broader community. We're going to have them start to go talk to their ministers, their faith leaders, their soccer. If it was Vegas, it was like soccer clubs, football, depending on where you are in the world. Whatever it's going to take to actually have enough support around the workers to realize they made a good decision really matters when the fight is feels like a slog. And you've got to bring the community into that fight. And in the case of some of the newer retail folks, I think the missing element still, honestly, is we've got to refound a consumers union as strong as the one we had in the early 1900s, when the cigar workers and a bunch of unions built a real consumers union that when they said, look for the label, write the old song of look for the, don't ask me to sing, I'm horrible, I can chant, but, look for the union label, which is this, came out of a consumers union in 1905. And that's a missing element, I think, in some of the recent work we're doing. Hello, I keep saying someone needs to go form that organization and do it really well. And it can't be people who take shortcuts. It can't be advocacy types and stuff. It actually has to be organizers, right? Who actually know how to build an organization of consumers who are going to become a key weapon in some of these higher turnover workplaces. But for the vast majority of people, whether it's Teamsters, UAW, Oakland teachers who are about to go on strike, the WGA, most workers have access to a lot of power in their own community, and the labor movement just leaves that power sitting on the table. And that's what I'm talking about in the new book, right? I wanted to call the book Leave No Power on the Table, to be perfectly honest, because we're in a climate where you have to do a power structure analysis and maximize every single piece of how the boss is going to go after you and how much power you can build. And what I've been saying to workers, involved in a big campaign I can't, of course, talk about. It's always the most interesting work. Can't talk about it yet. But what I'm always saying to people is, if you don't do a power structure analysis effectively, and if you leave the community out, it isn't just that you're leaving power on the table. It's that the employer class is going to step into that space and rip the power from you. So really the new book is about leaving no power on the table in an era of vicious union busting, We won in the 30s by not letting power on the table and doing a good power analysis and being honest and transparent and clear and leading with worker leaders. And those of us doing it are still winning today using the same methods, basically.
There's a lot in there. I was determined to have my next question go directly to some of these case studies, but I still have a couple of general ones now that you've raised. I mean, just working backwards from that, like the idea of, and I've heard what you're describing when you ask your members to go into the community, find the sources of like shared grievance, shared experience, shared, values that as social justice unionism as opposed to managerial one. And I think I first heard that from Barbara Maglione, who was a longtime head of the Massachusetts school, and that union has very successfully organized against like the charter expansion and many other things. But that idea of like it's almost equivalent to, you know, nature abhors a vacuum. If the union doesn't access the power that resides in the community, the employer will grab that power. How does that happen? Like, is it you know, if you're not going to those folks and making your case, the employer is going to come in and have them work against the unionization effort?
Yeah, absolutely. The best example, meaning a horrific example, the best example was the attempt by the previous leadership of the United Auto Workers. Thank goodness there's been a big change there. But in the old guard leadership of the corrupt UAW, in the big election that was probably 7 or 8 years ago in Tennessee, where the United Auto Workers had actually gotten an agreement for what was called a fair election procedure, an election procedure agreement.
Was it the Nissan plant in Tennessee? BMW. Okay.
Nissan was Alabama. So it went before that. And it was BMW and Volkswagen specifically.
Volkswagen. Right.
So I'm like reaching back because the example was so real. So this is what I mean about shortcuts. Okay. The old UAW leadership, not very creative, pretty corrupt, went and thought, you know, we're going to have an easy time because now we've got the European Union, IG Metall, to get the employer to say they won't fight the union. Well, there's a little misunderstanding of the power analysis there, just for starters. So that meant that they sent like the B, or I said in an article, UAW sent like a C team in terms of people who knew what they were doing. So that's a problem. But they did that based on the false assumption that the employer wouldn't fight back. Well, what the employer did, to make a long story very short, is they kind of followed the letter of the law. Like they didn't form the committee and fight back inside the workplace. They literally organized the wives, fair gendered, right? It's famous. They went and organized the wives in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the churches and the right-wing politicians. By the way, we're talking about Tennessee, so everyone has a little familiarity with how conservative that place is from recent happenings there. They went and literally, when I was interviewing people, went to the wives, and the wives, thinking about losing their jobs, went to their parishes. The parishes went to the politicians, and all of them ran a gigantic campaign to vote no against the union, and it worked. So that's the most like obvious example of literally a corporation figuring out we can get around this election procedure agreement, fair election agreement, by going to organize in the community to go against, to persuade the worker. So the wives organized their husbands to vote no in the end. It was amazing. And
I think if I remember correctly, it got national attention because you had federal senators get involved in that. I don't know who it was, like Corker maybe. Yeah. And I don't remember who the other senator was, but I remember that garnered a lot of attention to hear a senator talk about a unionization. Against the unionization drive in, their state. That was unique. All right. Well, that's a perfect example of that. Like any source of potential power for you is also a source of potential power for management in that instance. The other thing, consumer union. I don't know if people are familiar with that concept today, really. I remember the look for the union label ads. But I don't know if there's been any really in the past, I feel like 40 years, frankly. But I remember as a kid watching TV and seeing that. What is a consumer union?
Yeah, I mean, we must be sitting at about the same age, because it wasn't active in our lifetime, but it was like the leftover. It was on TV commercials, right, when we were young. And it's probably not a song that more recent generations have even heard. It was a real union, meaning people came together. Certainly it had support of some of the smarter unions. I think it was this, if I do my history right, it was the Cigar Workers Union that actually that inspired it. There's a middle tier of unions in the turn of the 2 centuries ago, where they understood that if the consumers continued to buy their product, that their strike would be less effective. And so there was a really strong, just call it an organization. It was nice it was called a union, right? But now the consumer groups today are like, tell you whether or not the product is good, as opposed to whether or not the workers have a living wage or their slave conditions in them. So what we are desperate for, we could outline how to build it if we want to, just brainstorming, but we're desperate for, I think, a sort of faith, an institution-based national organization that has the moral authority and the credibility and the focus to once again make it so that on the consumer retail side, we get away from individualism, which is the hype of our lifetimes, and we move people back to the idea of the collective. And I think there's so much evidence that every time we actually have these kind of frank conversations with ordinary people, they get the collective, they get it. And the conditions are so extreme now, they get it. So, what the Consumers Union did 120 years ago, 115 years ago, was they would investigate and they would say, okay, we're going to boycott this product to support the workers. And people signed up and pledged to do that and really actually did it. Now, given the hyper-individualism that has been created intentionally in the last 50 years, and the idea that collective is bad, individual is good, collective is bad, and social media and all this stuff, people might say it's impossible. But that's the same thing trade union leaders say about organizing, right? And strikes. And look at all the organizing and strikes going on. So just saying. Again, it's when we do it right. So, you could go, to me, the American Association of Retired People, like senior groups, faith houses. Like you could start to build a strategy of a quick way, not a shortcut way, but a quick and effective way to build a real consumer union based in some of the institutions that already exist, that have real reach into a real base in this country, and who I think could very easily be moved into the idea that fairness at work is a value that matters.
And so something like that could be deployed. There's a strike at Starbucks, or they can't get their contract. And the consumer union would say, we're calling on all our members to buy your coffee somewhere else, until further notice type of situation. Or
Yes, for sure. But also quickly, it'd have to be institutional. Like when you think about Starbucks, for example, there's all these institutional relationships between airports and like little individuals will be one part of it. But the reason I was saying the AARP, houses of faith, like it have to be institutional consumers, hospitals, universities. Like you'd have to just go to war and say, students, we're not going to let our university purchase from here. We're going to be part of the consumers union. So you'd have to make it strategic, like everything else, right? And that's about thinking the power of structure analysis through. But it would take about 30 minutes to do it. We don't want to do that on the whole show, but that's what we would be doing to make it effective.
And so the idea is that you also have almost like a wholesale power as well as the sort of the retail power associated with it. All right. Well, let's go on to some of these the case studies in your book, which basically are experiences that you had over the years, which were more effective than others. I mean, part of what you're trying to sort of dispel, and I think you've already done as we've talked, is like the lessons that you've garnered that the legacy unions failed to understand. I feel like that's really the entire sort of, the generalization of all the books. But one thing that stuck out for me, I guess, was, actually not in your book, but lessons that feel like they've been learned, was like in this amalgamated, I think you've wrote about the amalgamated transit in Kentucky. When they started to negotiate, the first rule that management wanted, condition before they sit down, was like, you can't share what we're negotiating with, what our negotiations with the rest of your membership until we come to a deal. They rejected that. And, you know, you could see within the context of your other case studies, the relevance of that. But will you explain to us why that was so important? Why that was such the right move to make for the amalgamated workers? Yeah,
that story really wrote itself. That's what I like to write, when workers do such smart things and they just tell the lesson, like the Chattanooga story we just talked about. But that was not a good example. But so there's two things that are related that we talk about in the book. One is something called ground rules. And I'm going to argue, there's no number, but no one's challenged it. I think at least 95% of all trade unions in the United States, that feels like a safe number to me, which is horrific, operate under what's called ground rules. So they engage in a negotiation with their employer, sort of pre-sitting down at the table, and they hammer out something called ground rules, which are legal under labor law. Very important thing for people who are facing negotiations and thinking about unionization. They're what we call, in the Byzantine nature of labor law, they're what we call non-mandatory subjects of bargaining. Okay, there's mandatory subjects of bargaining, which both parties must agree to take up, or there can be charges filed against you. Then there's non-mandatory subjects of bargaining, and we have a lot of information about this in the new book because there's so much confusion about it. So ground rules fall under a non-mandatory subject of bargaining or negotiations, which means you don't have to talk about them. Now, who wants either a corrupt union and or every bat boss or a lazy union wants ground rules? That the first one of which is usually what's called a gag order, which says, we agree, there's a few varieties of them. The most common one is we agree not to talk to the media during the course of negotiations. Who violates it first every damn time when the fight gets to a head? Okay, the boss. So for everyone who's ever signed one of those things, there's like lesson after lesson that the employer will violate it first. But anyway, but the majority of unions still actually sign off on language that says, we agree not to talk to the media nor to our own members until such time as a full tentative agreement has been reached. And then they come out of months or years, depending on the union, of negotiations, and no member's been briefed on what is going on in their own negotiations. That led to the John Deere rejection of a contract a couple of years ago, by the way. And it's so counterintuitive to me, but that's because I was trained by really good trade union leaders, right, when I was a young organizer. So in the case I wrote about recently from Louisville, Kentucky, amalgamated transit workers union leader, she was the first one, Lillian, was the first one, a Black woman, in the union, because they just passed a national policy and no other union has it. So first I was sitting down to write about that they had voted in October of last year, October of 2022, at their national convention. Again, more reform-minded leadership getting serious about organizing. They passed a national resolution saying that they embrace transparent, big, and open negotiations, which are the three tests that we're using in the book. Like, are you operating full transparency? You cannot sign a gag rule that says you won't talk to your members if you do that. And then, are you electing a big committee? And are you letting all the members covered by the agreement in the room? Come back to those other two. But on this one, she had a lot of pressure to sign the ground rules. She was newly elected, Black woman, hadn't been many of them in leadership of her union, and at a bus transit agency. And she didn't take the bait. So she said, I've been told by my national union, I don't have to sign these things, and I'm not signing them. And within weeks, one of the first proposals was this really racist proposal called the 3-2-1 proposal, which was to give the largest raise, a 3% raise, to like the handful of white workers who worked for the transit agency, which were like the highest tier kind of engineers for buses and keeping things moving. And then give a 2% raise to the largest unit, which is mostly women of color, bus drivers, and then to give a 1% raise to mostly African American men who clean and do maintenance around all the bus depots and all the terminals and stuff. So the 3-2-1 proposal is wildly racist, which she points out right away. Like, what do you mean you're going to give 3% to the handful of... So had she signed that gag order or any ground rule, she took the same position that I have taken my entire life. I've never signed a ground rule in my life, never even negotiated them. Boss comes in and says, well, it's time to negotiate ground rules. Actually, they'll do it ahead of time. They won't even do it in front of the workers. They'll just email a bad union and they'll do it in email. But I digress. But, they'll walk in the room and say, okay, let's start off with our proposed ground rules. No talking to the media, no talking to the members, no sharing information, no blah, blah, blah. And I always just wait for that moment, and I say, yeah, thanks for sharing. We really appreciate that proposal on your part. But since it's not a mandatory subject of negotiations, we'd like to get right to it. Because that's all you have to do. And she did it. And that allowed her to go build the union probably 2 or 3 times more powerful than it was going to be to begin with in that fight, because she got to go say to everyone, there's some really racist proposals coming from management. And then it got even worse, which I talk about, where the employer, as sort of, when she said we're going to let all the members come to negotiations, the employer said, why don't we just negotiate at the zoo? By the way, you can have a view of the orangutan exhibit. And that was all real. And there's, like when I was writing The Nation, I had to show them the actual email exchanges, which the lawyers have for the union. So, the level of racism was dripping both in the wage proposals and just in general. And that allowed that union to grow stronger than it's ever been and win a terrific contract where they got 6% across the board raises for every single worker in year 1 of the contract, 4% in year 2. There's just a lot of smart things that you can do when you don't bind yourself. And you don't engage your own members in the fight.
It's interesting too, because the ground rules really seem, I guess theoretically I could come up with some ideas of ground rules that would not be necessarily inhibit the power of a union, but it's almost like, Matt, who's 6'3" or something, and I, who's 6 foot-ish, were to agree on ground rules when we, before we play a basketball game, no jumping. Well, we're both subject to those, but it's going to benefit him. When you have a top-down system for the management, that works because that's their entire sort of like source of authority is top-down. It's the opposite when it comes to unions. The authority that these negotiators have is because of the power of the union, of everybody involved in the union, and to cut them off from that, it does seem sort of like intuitively like that's a bad idea. That's where all your power comes from. It's an interesting dynamic. It's also sort of fascinating to me that it's not, it clearly hasn't been obvious to a lot of unions. Give us an example within the context. We should say that you give, you have about 7 chapters where you cover experience you've had with Philadelphia nurses, New Jersey teachers, news writers, journalists, both in New York and LA, nurses out in Western Mass, hotel workers in Marriott, I guess. I don't, and then in Berlin, some hospital workers. What would you say? Like, I don't know. We can't cover all of them. What for you? What are the 2 or 3 key lessons out of those fights that you pulled out?
Yeah, the lessons start with the one we were just on, which is full transparency. And by the way, the WGA, the Writers Guild, is exercising full transparency. They have been wildly publishing. I just saw it on Twitter again this morning too. Like, they're publishing their demands, right? Like, the idea that it somehow helps you to keep your demand secret is just, it's anyway.
And the Writers Guild, we should say, like the Writers Guild, I was a former member back in the day when I was in that business. And I remember they would always say, like, we know you guys are real individuals and you don't like, and there's like, I don't know, there's something, I guess, 11,500 or so members. And writers are pretty solitary people, and they, in my experience in that business, they all think that they're better than everybody else. That's the way that you you succeed in there. And opening it up to everybody at least makes it, what it seems to me to do is it also, like, I have specific people who come to mind from the last writer's strike, but there are people who really have the ability to undercut the power of the union, and the less transparency, the easier it is for some of those people to do so, because they're like, you don't know what they're doing behind closed doors. These guys are idiots. They're giving away the house, or they're doing this and that. The more transparent it is, at least there's a level of trust. There's a level of buy-in. You feel like you have an impact on stuff because you're speaking specifically to specifics. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We sort of walk away. I started to call it high. By the time the book came out, I had changed my language that I've been using for years, which was transparent, big, and open negotiations. Those are still the criteria, though. But what as organizers do, obsess about semantics, I sort of renamed it high participation, high power negotiations, right? By the time I'm in peer review, trying to crank out that book last summer, and responding to reviewers. And I think those words, high participation, high power, are a better reflection, but the criteria for it and the lesson from every one of those cases you just rattled off, and the German one matters. We might note that in the end, the sort of myth of Germany and how these processes worked over there. But it's about transparency. So no ground rules, no gag order. And you're right. You could sign a ground rule that says we all agree to come on time. For me, it's a control thing. So I'm just not going to agree to any of them. I'm just teach the workers right away. You don't have to listen to this garbage. Yes. I always just say, yes, we're the polite people. We'll be here on time. Next topic, who's late? Them. Anyway. So the second one is about electing, keyword, very large worker committees. Why? Because the employer's going to lie through their teeth most of the time at the negotiations table. True. Sue me. I mean, it's just true. My life experience. And so when you elect when you have a large committee, and you can have a large committee and not elect them. So there's two things. You have a large committee, that's a great start. And if you elect them, even better. But having a large committee, by which I mean every single kind of worker covered by the collective agreement, including every one of those workers by different shifts, if it's if they have different shifts, because the experience for a healthcare worker at 3 a.m. is different than at 3 p.m. So every kind of worker covering every kind of shift is like the minimum for what should be on a committee. And, in big units, that could mean 200, 300 people, right? Easily. If you've got a whole hospital to negotiate, right? You get the techs, the nurses, the dietary, housekeeping, the whole thing. So it's a lot of different people. And the reason it matters is because no negotiator, I don't care how many times I've done it and how effective I feel doing it, no negotiator is ever going to understand the workplace the way all the workers do. And none of them are going to be able to fact check the employer at the table. When I go to negotiations, there's hundreds of workers in the room with me every single time. And I just get to look around at, for the fact checking, because it's going to be immediate and on the spot. It makes the employer effing crazy. So that's big. I prefer elected committees because I describe it in the chapter on Philadelphia. I didn't always have it this way, but later, as I was aging, in the negotiations and union organizing world, I realized the role of the organizing and the structure tests, what we call the structure tests, that I wanted workers to understand from day one that if they weren't engaged in participating actively from the contract survey process on, they could make any demand they wanted, but they weren't going to win. So electing committees, I've started to set rules later in my life, and obviously voted on by the workers themselves, that said, we're not even going to open up negotiations until 65% of the workers or greater by unit and by shift have filled in the contract survey. We're not even going to put a proposal across the table until at least 65% of you are doing it. And that's a, I think, beautifully high threshold, right? So and when they say, why? We can't get that in our unit. And I say, yes, you can. And when the first unit does it, and get 65% on their initial contract survey, then you just hold that up and say, okay, well, this unit did it, so start doing it. And we make the criteria for electing a member of the negotiations committee contingent on high participation in your unit, because you ain't gonna win if you aren't teaching the workers from day one. No clever negotiators winning at the table. It's you and your coworkers. And if you're not actively engaging, starting from day one, the building of this contract, the proposals, your opinions, you're not going to win. That's just like being honest about the 12-month thing, right? Just be honest with people. They really appreciate honesty, it turns out. And then the last one is about open. And when I say open, and Abby Lawler and I mean in the book, we define it. We say open to all the workers covered by the collective bargaining agreement. I actually don't mean open to the whole universe. Maybe my years in Nevada, where there's a very powerful right-wing anti-tax movement, and I had very large public sector units, if I argued for open, first of all, you wouldn't win it under the law. Like, there's case law that says that, and I've had to go up, I've had to use it because many employers have challenged us when we say we're going to let any worker covered by the agreement into the room. Sometimes 500 walk in. That's good. Employers will always challenge it. So we've been able to win on that. But also, I wouldn't want it open to everyone. You can bring a guest speaker. Barbara Maidaloni, he mentioned, I think. You can bring in one of the case studies from Western Mass, where she's from, but it's the hospital union, nurses union. They brought people in to speak and testify about the conditions for patients in the community. You're always allowed to bring a guest person to speak. But the right to attend negotiations is fundamental for the workers. And so for me, that's the final threshold. And it's so powerful, because if you've got a skeptical worker, if management's running a line, and then that they're lying, it's what Lillian did. It's come out of the room, right? I mean, I've in right to work for less states, which I've worked in many of, sharpened my skill on all these things. I would say to the most skeptical worker who was not a dues paying member, come on in the room and talk about that proposal, because I'm organizing them. We hear what they care about, and they're like, yeah, but I'm not a member. But I don't believe in the union. I'm like, that's cool. No problem. Why don't you just come? We're cool with that. Why don't you just come to negotiations and actually present on that topic? And you know what happens? It's never not happened that even a potentially anti-union worker will walk into that room, see all their coworkers, realize it's the employer that's holding them back and not this thing called the union. And they convert, like they change their view of what a union is. So those are the things that we pull out from the case studies, from the real life stuff. And they're all recent, right? I mean, 2016 is the oldest one in there. So they're all recent examples, which I always like to do, of workers using effective methods. This is essentially the no shortcuts. This is the organizer's approach to negotiations, right? That's what I was taught. And that's what I'm espousing. And now I had a lot of people, I'll stop here, but it was actually the Germans. I was doing a ton of work in Germany starting in 2019 when they translated my first book. And now they're all in German. All of the books, including this one's already halfway translated. And they said to me, you keep talking about this big and open negotiation stuff you do. You got to spell it out for us, because you probably don't just wake up one day, Jane, and open up the room. And I'm like, you're right. We don't. It starts with the contract survey process. And it's not anonymous, and it's one-to-one, and it's an organizing conversation. And you say, if 65% of people in your unit don't get involved in the contract survey, we're not even going to go to the table. So do you want to change things? Okay, we'll get involved. So they literally said to me over and over, a team of organizers in Germany, write a damn book on it. So we can credit the German organizers for actually making me write the book, and then hiring a graduate student named Abby, who did a great job.
That's amazing. I mean, it really does feel, I think the thing that comes from both these books is that organizing is really a practice in many respects, as opposed to sort of a sort of one-off action. It is something that is ongoing and builds on itself as you go through. And I would imagine too, I mean, the difficult part is it's hard to organize. It's hard to negotiate when you have 500 people who are stakeholders, sort of developing that position. That makes it more difficult in the short run, but in the long run, what ultimately comes out of that process is a lot more rock solid and a lot more undeniable than something that just rests on one person's assumptions of what the different people are gonna want in that in that context. I feel like we could talk for hours about this stuff.
Can I just say one thing about what the smart comment you just made, because you always make them. That's why I enjoy being here. Just to that point, really quickly, the point of the 500 in the room, and yes, I mean, I've had national union trade leaders say to me, "You're crazy to do this." You know what I mean? Aren't they all just fighting in there and stuff? And I'm like, oh my God! First of all, you have a diminished view of workers, but second of all, what it does, Sam, is it prepares them to know how to defend the agreement once they sign it. It builds what we call in the book governing power. The first I say in the book that this phase between the election, where they first learn to build solidarity and unify and overcome management's objections, that's the election phase. The phase of the first contract negotiations in particular is what I call the governing phase, where workers learn how to come to compromises, how to work things out among themselves, how to govern, because the left, whatever that means, or progressives in this country have so little experience actually governing that learning how to do it is the point of the first contract negotiations, in my opinion, and my life experience. So they're learning what it would take to sort of run their workplace. In the case of Einstein, what would it take to really be in charge of your place of work? You know, like actually control the production process in some old lingo, like actually make the rules at work and then enforce them. That's what they learn when you're willing to have 500, 400, 300,000 people come in the room. And by the way, during the negotiations, they're silent. So there is a set of rules that I always ask the workers to embrace, which is when the employer's in the room, everyone's silent. When the employer's not in the room, you know, holy hell happens, and that's as it should be.
Right. You don't want the employer to see any they assume there's going to be dissension, because there's always dissension with 500 people, but you don't want them to know where it is, I would imagine, from a strategic or tactical standpoint. All right. So final question, a general one again. How would you describe, where is it coming from? Because I suspect I would know the answer if it's just yes or no. But how would you describe the change that you've seen over the past, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, however many years it is? I mean, really, it sort of feels like, to me, the big benchmark strike was that Chicago teachers strike. But how would you explain that change? Like, where does is it cyclical? Where does it come from? How does it manifest itself? Like, how would you describe that? Because it does feel like there is this sort of change within unions. Some, you feel like the leadership is being pulled by, the membership, and they're just sort of hanging on for dear life, sort of like talking in a way that they think will placate the membership, and others, you've seen changes in leadership. Where is this coming from? Yeah,
I think you're right. It starts in Chicago, 2012. And I think, workers are willing to take high risk and fight if they believe there's a credible plan to win. And the term credible plan to win is literally like, that's an art form in the union that trained me. Like, those words are not ones I made up. Like, I was jammed in my head. For workers to take high risk, they have to understand, be part of making it, right? So that's the key thing. If they're part of making it, high contract survey thresholds, not anonymous, all that stuff, right? They're making a credible plan to win, and they're willing to step out of the security of anonymity and risk aversion, and actually take action. So I think it's been really important that there's been some very high profile strikes, beginning with Chicago in 2012, where people saw workers fighting like mad in a massive supermajority strike and winning against the odds, against really stiff opposition. And then you carry that into 2018, and in 2018, we have the highest number of workers on strike in 30 years. That's just before the pandemic, right? Huge education strikes, but not just that. The Marriott strike that we're covering in the book, that was a national Marriott strike against the most powerful corporation in the world. And academics love to say, well, you might be able to take on a school district, Jane, as they like to say to me. But, you know, low-wage workers can't take on the largest corporation in the world. And went, okay, that's why we put that fight in there, because, yeah, they damn well did, right? It's about organizing power and strategy and not leaving power on the table. So I think it comes from workers seeing other workers winning. That's fundamental to the motivation. And then the abject conditions the employers are putting us under. Everyone's basically going to be an Uber driver. If workers don't fight back right now, whether you're a writer in Hollywood, a teacher in Oakland, you know, a UPS driver, whatever you are, you're just about to become, you know, a poor, Uberized, have no rights, have no future, have no life worker, unless and until people fight back, and they are fighting back.
Yeah. It's the gigification of every sector. And like, I mean, it's great that you say that, because in reading about the WGA or the writers' strike or earlier today, they cite that as being their number one complaint. And it was the same thing when we covered the UPS pending strike. That's also the same complaint. So there is a theme here where employers understand that this is their most efficient avenue to undercutting labor power, is to exploiting these labor or these gig laws.
Absolutely. All the way, completely. And whether or not they're formally exploiting them or informally exploiting them, that is what's happening. The titans of Silicon Valley, in fact, are sort of winning these structural changes in the workplace that we've known all along are devastating. And the more workers experience it, the more pissed off they're becoming. And then you add to that a pandemic where people just got shat all over by the employer class, and you've got a bunch of young people really who haven't been steeped in 50 years of McCarthyism or the leftover of it. And you've got a nice thing going on right now where workers, thank goodness, are feeling a sense of urgency and fighting back.
You know, when you say 2018, that was the year of the Red State Revolt, where you had these non-unionized, really, teachers in states, I can't remember all of them, but Kentucky and
Arizona, West Virginia,
Arizona, states where there was no, where, you know, there was right to work, so-called right to work laws, and teachers struck back. And I remember going to the AFT convention that year, and particularly in the context of the middle management of the union, if you will, sort of the more localized leaders who had become, I don't know if radicalized is the right word, but they certainly were like, didn't realize we could do that. Like they you know, they had been in the union for a long time, and they would just sort of had gotten into a place where it was taken as granted that they had no power. And when they saw these teachers, it reinvigorated their sort of sense of like, maybe going on strike is not such the like sort of terrifying thing and futile thing that we thought it was. And it really seemed to impact people. And I feel like that has just built upon itself. Well, you know, I wanted to talk to you about the Glacier Northwest Teamsters and the UPS strike, which we could be just a couple of months away from. We're going to have you back to talk about those things. These are going to be important things. You really do get the sense, particularly with the UPS thing, if that UPS strike happens, this is something that is going to be sort of national in a way that we haven't really, you know, Starbucks is national, but it's a series of like sort of localized things. This UPS thing is going to be something that I think, like, you know, people in one state and
the
people
pilots
they know, and the pilots as well. I mean, this could be a very, very important summer in terms of a labor action. And
we should. It's so funny you say that, because I literally this weekend just wrote 2 different opinion pieces that I'm pitching places. One is on Glacier and what it means, and one is on the UPS UAW, the change in leadership. I don't want to give it away now, but analogizing it to some recent other struggles and talking about the promise of what may come. So both topics, things that are central in my mind, I'm writing about them, and would love to come back and talk about them anytime.
Fantastic. Well, the book is Rules to Win By: Power and Participation in Union Negotiations, written by Jane McAlevey, and of course with Abby Lawler. We will put a link to that at majority.fm and in the podcast and YouTube description. Jane, always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Likewise, great to see you, Sam and Emma, and the whole crew behind all of you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jane. Joined now by Camille Ray, who is the mother of her trans son, Leon, who has been outspoken about her family's decision to leave Texas. Camille, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you opening up and speaking about your family's experience.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just start there. I mean, we've been covering the hundreds and hundreds of anti-LGBTQ, anti-trans bills throughout the country that just in this calendar year. And Texas passed a trans gender-affirming care ban for minors back in May. So your family had to make a really tough decision. What led you to this moment?
Well, it really wasn't tough in the moment in a way, because it was so obvious that we and our rights were in danger that it made it very easy to decide to leave, because that's not the environment I wanted to raise my child in. And it's not where I felt I could be a parent, that I could make the best medical decisions for my child. If I couldn't do that, why would I stay? So in that sense, it was easy.
And still, though, I mean, it's a massive upheaval. And I mean, you spoke in your Daily Beast interview a bit about how you saw this coming as other states were beginning to pass their own gender-affirming transition care bans, particularly for minors, but not exclusively. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say that's right. I grew up in Texas. I know what the politics is like. And when I saw that Arkansas was the first state to pass such a ban, I knew that was going to happen in Texas. And sure enough, I went online, I found that the bills had already been introduced. I just hadn't heard of them yet. And so that's when I decided to try to fight them in the hopes that I could stay in Texas. However, it did become clear during the fight that this issue was not going away. And even back then in 2021, when the bill, at least for banning gender-affirming medical care for minors, was defeated, the parents around me said, we were here 2 years ago fighting the bathroom bill. This is not going away. We'll be back in another 2 years fighting the same bills. And I said, that is not a way to live. It's just horrible. It was causing Leon stress. He had chronic stomach aches. He missed so much of second grade that he barely passed it. And I was stressed. I didn't know what was coming next. The parents around me were starting to create safe folders, or I'm not even sure what they were called, but these documents in case Child Protective Services came knocking at your door. You had evidence gathered in a folder that you're a good parent. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm out.
I mean, so how old is Leon now?
Leon is now 10.
Right. And I mean, I was in the Daily Beast interview. He was talking about how he loves playing basketball and loves basketball. And one of the bills that pass is a ban on trans kids participating in sports. What does that say to your child? That,
right.
Leon is a boy, but for some reason the state has said, well, not really a boy, and you don't get to be a part of like the social structures that your friends are a part of. I mean, what does that feel like for him?
It feels terrible, and in a way, luckily, he's too young to fully articulate it, but he's not too young to feel it, and you can hear in the question at the time. So when we were in Texas, that was the only piece of legislation that did pass, the ban on minor children playing on the sports team that aligned with their gender. And when that passed, he was playing on a team at the Y, but it was a co-ed team. But still, he said to me, because he doesn't understand that all the nuances, then he was 8 at the time. He said, does that mean I don't get to play basketball? So, what it means for him is that he knows that people are against him even existing. And that is I don't understand how that's not completely devastating and paralyzing. But he's a kid and he's resilient and he doesn't know any better. But, if someone started treating me that way, I don't know how I would get up in the morning.
I mean, can you talk a bit about your family's process as you knew that Leon was transitioning or was a boy, what that was like, and your family's story leading up to where you had to make this decision?
Right. So it was the beginning of the pandemic. We were all in the house a lot together, and we were just hanging out one day. And I was talking to Leon's older sister about the importance of loving yourself. And Leon pipes up in the background and says, "But I don't love myself." And that just didn't make sense to me as his mom. I've been watching this kid be, super gregarious, outgoing. I called him the ambassador of the family because he would bring friends to us. He was just that much of the life of the party kind of personality. And you're like, how can you not love yourself? You're only 7, And so, he had already started wearing his hair short, but so did his sister. But he had started refusing her sparkly hand-me-downs, the T-shirts I would buy with, pink flamingos. And he was like, "Can you just buy me a gray T-shirt?" I'm like, "Sure." I didn't know much about what it meant to be transgender. And I didn't know that the children know at such a young age, that we've assigned them the wrong gender. And so I just thought, well, someday when it's time to date, we'll have some issue with sexuality. And I didn't realize that it was a gender issue. And anyway, that day I asked him if he would like to see his sister's therapist, and he said yes. And I was like, okay, again, this makes no sense. Why would a 7-year-old want to go to therapy? But he knew something was wrong. And later he told me, I just knew I wasn't who you expected me to be. And so, but in therapy, we both learned eventually about transgender identity, and the therapist recommended a children's book for him, and he read it, and a few days later he came to me and said, "Do you think I'm?" And I said, "Well, it doesn't matter what I think, it matters what you think." I knew what he was talking about, being transgender, and he couldn't talk. He had a panic attack. Again, 7 years old, you're like watching all these things that you don't expect. And I said, "Well, why don't I say it and you shake your head yes or no?" And I said, "Do you think you're transgender?" And he shook his head yes. And in that moment, I was just like, well, okay, we'll figure it out and we'll get you what you need. That was kind of my attitude. And
yeah.
At first it was a process to include the family in this revelation and realization. But he took us right along really quickly. By the end of the summer, this was in May, by the end of the summer, we had his new name, his new pronouns, his gender marker changed on his birth certificate. Everyone in our immediate circle accepted him. The people who had all known him with a different name were now using the new name. Our family, grandparents, everyone was on board, and everything was fine. I did take him out of the school system because I had heard, that no transgender child had ever stayed in that school system because it was unwelcoming. It's not the Austin proper, but out in the hill country. And so we made that change, and everything was moving fine until this legislation was introduced. And that's what people have to understand, that even it being introduced is harmful. Even having this conversation, questioning someone's existence is harmful, much less actually passing the bills, of course, is a whole nother level of harm. But we suffered just from being in that environment.
I mean, it makes total sense. And I'm just so struck by how you speak really plainly about you just essentially responding to what your son was telling you, because so much of the anti-trans panic is focused on parental rights. What are we going to do about the parents, when it's really about parents? How are you going to treat your children with respect and agency and hear what they have to say about their lives and internalize it without rejecting it? It's just good parenting. That's the bottom line.
Right. And, Leon's my third child. And of course, I've made many mistakes before, and I'll make many mistakes coming. But by then I was very clear that my children are not mini me's. They're on their own journey. And I had always treated all of them, with respect as far as their choices, as things that they could choose, how to express themselves were they interested in piano? Did they like fish? I mean, whatever it was, I was going to encourage it. And so I was actually shocked that here I thought I was being a parent that lets their children express themselves, that lets their children be who they are, gives them the space and the room to do that. But yet I had actually been unknowingly putting expectations on Leon that were weighing on him. He knew he wasn't living up to my expectations. If you had asked me, I would have said, I have no expectations. But of course we do. In this society, we totally think in a binary way. We totally think about gender. I mean, we have gender reveal parties. I mean,
Yeah.
It's so ingrained, and how we back up from that as parents and even as a society is, I have no idea. But I'm here and I'm willing to help people figure it out as I figure it out.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you speaking about this because it's just really helpful to hear your experience. And I just wanted to know if you'd be okay talking a bit about what gender affirming care looks like for Leon, because
Sure.
again, we combat the right wing every day on the show, and it's mutilation. Like they post photos of surgeries as if like, yeah, surgery is bloody. Sometimes it's a little gross. It's that way for knee replacements. It's that way for rhinoplasties. But in terms of Leon's care calendar, what can you tell us about that? Because I think that might be helpful for people to understand.
Sure. So I happened to be at a comedy show this past weekend in DC, and it tells you how mainstream the issue of transgender identity has become, that the comic was making jokes about transgender. But in his show, he said something to the effect of giving hormones to 3-year-olds. I was like, yeah, no.
Right.
I understand needing to be funny, but that's not funny. It wasn't funny to me because it's so inaccurate. And so what gender affirming care looks like at the beginning is basically social transition. So it's allowing the child to change their hairstyle, their clothing styles, use different pronouns, that sort of thing. It's completely social. At some point, well, right before puberty, that basically if you have the care you need, your physician is monitoring your child for signs of puberty. When they do start to show signs of puberty, then you have the decision and the discussion whether to start puberty blockers so that the child does not go through changes in their body that will be very upsetting to them, and actually is a medical diagnosis of body dysmorphia. And this is just where you feel uncomfortable in your skin, and those kinds of changes would be really upsetting. And so when those changes do occur, the physician, the counselor or a therapist, the parents, even the child, get together and say, here are your options. What do we do? And so for Leon, we all decided together that puberty blockers would be the way to go. These are reversible.
Yep.
They give the child and the family more time to figure out, are we on the right track here with your gender identity? Do you feel comfortable this way? It's a question, and we always want to leave room, for different answers. And so the puberty blockers give us a time and the space to do that. And so that's what he's on now. Eventually, it'll be time, in the teenage years to switch to hormone therapy, in which he would get testosterone, if we decide that. Not everyone has to do that. Everyone's path is different. This is not like you jump on the train and then you can't get off. You can get off anytime. We do not do surgery. Nobody does surgery. Surgery is not the standard of care for minors. So that this tells you right there, anyone who's talking about that and knows better is just trying to scare you. Anyway, I'm not even going to say the words, but it's just not standard of care. It may be prescribed very late in the teen years for someone who really has severe dysmorphia. If it's a matter between this person staying alive and having some kind of surgery, mostly that would be top surgery. And even less common would be any kind of bottom surgery. Really is after 18. I mean, it really is. And I'm not a medical doctor, but this is my understanding as a parent who has done the research. But please, I'm not trying to be an expert, but I am trying to say from where I sit, surgery is very rare.
No, well, I mean, everything that I've researched in my time, covering the news is the calendar that you describe is exactly what the standard of care is. And again, these right wingers don't talk about breast augmentations, which happen underage, breast reductions, which happen underage, which is equivalent to a top surgery. Even that is happening in incredibly rare instances. And a ban on gender affirming care in practice, I mean, that is just going to increase levels of gender dysphoria, as you describe, gender dysphoria, which would have and has documented to have incredibly negative mental health effects, and is a really big part of increased suicidal attempt and suicidal ideation rates among trans kids, because they're unable to socially transition in the way or that fits best with their vision for themselves. This is just about empowering children and families to determine this kind of calendar of care for those kids.
Yeah, and I think everyone can identify with the fact they would like their insides to match their outsides. I mean, everyone chooses a hairstyle. Everyone chooses their wardrobe. Everyone chooses how to express themselves, even in whether they play the piano or they play sports. Children, everyone should have that right.
Yeah. Lastly, before I let you go, you've moved to the DC area, right? I guess you've already made that move, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I wonder if you could reflect on other families in your position who might not have the ability to move, and what that really means for. I know it was an easy decision for you, and I understand that. It's just there's going to be a lot more people who are going to be forced to make that choice. What's your message to them, and if it's not workable for them?
Right.
How does that go?
So I just want to clarify. There's two things. There's a difference between it was an easy decision and whether the process itself has been easy, which it has not. It has been soul crushing, to be honest, and it's still ongoing. And I'm not in Texas near my family as they age and pass away. Weddings and funerals. I mean, there's and issues that come up in my life where I wish they were closer to me, health scares or whatever, so it hasn't been easy. And for the people who can't leave, I can't tell you how much that weighs on me. And which is why I say yes to all these interviews, because they can't speak. They cannot speak out for fear of being targeted politically, physically. It's terrible. And it makes me angry that happens in our country. I mean, we talk about free speech. They don't have free speech right now. Right.
Yeah, it's an incredibly scary time. I'm glad you were able to make this move, and you're, a great mom. So thank you, Camille. I really appreciate your time and taking the time to tell us a little bit about your family today.
Yeah, anytime.
All right, let's go to the phones. Calling from a 646 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 646.
Sam?
Yep. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, man, it's Jon Benjamin from Colin. How are you?
Hey, John. What's up?
How you doing?
Good. I'm doing my show right now, incidentally.
No, I know. I just figured I would call just because, I want to address this. I talked to Tim last night, and
Tim?
I just wanted to go to. No, Tim Pool.
Mm. Okay.
Regarding the stuff he was talking about regarding Bob's Burgers, and I'm obviously Bob on Bob's Burgers, so. When I talk to Tim about it, I usually don't want to get in the middle of shit like this. And I certainly don't want to, deal with this publicly. I probably could have called you earlier. I just figured I would.
Wait.
I have free time now, and then I'm back, obviously, to recording Bob's Burgers, because that's what I to all the time.
Wait. What are you?
I understand. Well, let me finish. This is kind of what Tim was talking about. How you filibuster and cut people off. But when you talk to Tim about the problems you were having with Bob's Burgers, of course Tim was going to talk to me about it.
Wait, what? What are you talking about? There's a what?
About how you were upset about your diminished role in the show, and how Tim had pointed that out, rightfully so, because he was just, telling it like it is, like he does.
There's video? Well, hold on.
That's how.
I have no idea. I have no idea
I assume you saw it.
I did not see it. Hold on. There's what? Then play it, Bradley. Hold on for 1 second. I want to see this.
Okay.
I
all right.
Honestly, no idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
Okay. What? Biden.
They did a bait and switch with that other guy with the eyebrow action. What's his name?
And so this is why, I have no problem with mentioning him. You want us to talk about it? Listen, the dude, his whole shtick is trying to get attention. He's sadly desperate. Mm-hmm. He did a voice on Bob's Burgers, and they started cutting his character out, and he was losing it. He does you ever see Bob's Burgers?
Yeah.
Sam Seder is the voice of the health inspector. And I remember I was talking to him once, and he was like, "Yeah, but they're like weaseling me out of the show, man." And he's getting bummed about it. So what does he do? No, I mean, I'd be bummed too. I mean, I feel for him.
Wow, caught red-handed, Sam.
I don't really remember.
I assume you would. Yeah. I assume you had heard that.
No, I didn't. I didn't hear that. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't remember ever saying to Tim Pool in any type of conversation that we've ever had, which is mostly been recorded, but just like, hey man, I'm losing my mind. That doesn't sound like me so much.
Well, I mean, that does sound like a little bit of what you were going through, and Timbo was talking to me last night about it. Look, I guess he was saying in good faith. I guess he sort of asked me to sort of bridge this. Like I said, I want to de-escalate because that's what Timbo wants to do, and he doesn't want this.
Hold on. There's more. There's another clip. All right, play that one. What the?
This guy's obsessed with you.
My point. Look, dude.
Who?
I've done a debate with Sam Seder. He didn't know what solipsism was. He didn't know what deontological moral philosophy was. He didn't know what utilitarianism meant.
He's an actor first. I agree.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean,
when I was talking to Tim, obviously you're a consequentialist, right?
I mean, no. I mean, I guess I'm more of a utilitarian. I guess arguably a consequentialist.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, have you read Brand at all?
Russell?
No, CD?
No, I haven't read CD. I've read Russell Brand.
You've read Russell Brand? Why?
Because it's
the bookie books were okay.
In praise of idleness, I was into that. But what does that got to do with anything, John?
I mean, have you read? I mean, that is this has to do with everything of why you do have a diminished role in body. Have you read Nagel?
Well, that was the whole point with Lauren.
What about Scanlon? Have you read Scanlon or Scruton? Any of these people?
I haven't read Scanlon or Scruton.
Sir Edmund Burke. Have you read? Sir, you took government in college, didn't you?
A little bit of Burke, but what does this got to do with Bob's?
Have you read C.S. Lewis? Have you read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe?
What has this got to do with Bob's Burgers?
Have you read Immanuel Kant? I mean,
yes, I have.
Categorical imperative.
Yeah.
You have. So you know Pflicht. You know Pflicht.
I don't know Pflicht.
You're aware of Pflicht.
Well, but John, what has this got to do with Bob's Burgers is my question.
Do you practice self-love?
What?
In a Kantian sense. Do you practice self-love?
Hey, philosophical self-love.
Look, John.
Yes, do you masturbate to Kant? Do you do that?
Occasionally Hume, okay?
Okay, well, this is the point that Tim is getting at, and this is why it's true. We have a problem. The show has a problem with you. Have you seen Infinity Wars?
The Infinity Wars?
Have you even seen Age of Ultron? Have you seen any of the Marvels? Have you seen Iron Man?
Of course I've seen that.
This is what Tim is talking about, dude.
I just don't follow what that's got to do with what you're even...
Have you seen Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
I have
the
not...
The TV series.
No, I haven't.
See, this is like none of this stuff. You don't have any of the reference, the frame of references that we do, that Tim and I do, that the show does.
Wait, how does Bob's Burgers do anything about the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or any of this?
You got to, like, what you need to do is just address these issues first. Get on the internet, look up some of this stuff, read some of this stuff, get on board. And then, I'll go back to Tim, and I'll tell him that we talked. But until you do these things, like, I feel like this is not going to work out for you. It's not going to get you. It's not going to get you more voice work.
So wait. Your argument is that if I can make a good case, a Hegelian case, as to why Kant's whole sort of moral ethics is too self-contradictory, then I'm going to get more Hugo on Bob's Burgers.
I mean, if you do those things, I can definitely talk to people at the show.
Well, I don't even understand why you care.
Yeah. You gotta look. You gotta look deeper, man.
Look inward. See, that's the whole problem, is that you don't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Deontology, but look into it. Call me back, and then we can figure this shit out. I'll go back to Tim and tell him I talked to you, and like I said, I didn't even want to get mad about this. I didn't even want to get in the middle of it.
All right.
I don't want to, he's going to make another video tonight, probably.
Well, I appreciate the call. I appreciate the effort. So,
yeah. Look out, man. Look out.
Can't we just agree, though? Like, and I know some could say this is a little solipsistic, but the movie needed more Hugo, right?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, the movie needed more Hugo. It did, just like in terms of like just to actually create the tension necessary.
Well, see, now you're talking. You started to look. You obviously looked up what solipsism was, and now you're sort of owning it.
Yeah, there you go.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, there you go. Dialectically speaking, it needed more Hugo.
Yeah. All right, man. Good luck.
All right, thanks. Thanks for the call. All right. Well, all right.
You might even say Hugo the health inspector embodies the world spirit.
You might say that.
It's just like
deontological ethics are for babies.
Yeah.
Like, what's your sense of duty? Who tells you that? Daddy?
Well, it's
for babies.
It's libertarianism, right?
But,
it's just like ultimately, it's just like the way that it gets communicated, and I don't care, and I will make this clear. I've said this before. I don't care. I don't care if you can classify my positions in the context of philosophy or not. I don't care. But I am happy if the reason why that Tim refuses to debate, as opposed to like when we had the last debate, and I think it was a little embarrassing for him. I think that was part of the problem. Is because unlike all his other guests, I don't have a deep enough understanding of deontology as it relates to an ethical worldview.
Yeah, unlike the Hodge twins.
Yeah.
You just don't have the perspicacity, right? That's what it was?
I guess so. And also, the one thing I did find really amusing is that people don't say, like, Tim doesn't seem to understand. And of course, he's heard me bitch about Hugo. I mean, it's not like I didn't start a hashtag Where's Hugo 8 years ago complaining about my role on the program.
It's sort of a bit.
That kind of went over his head a little bit.
It may have gone over his head a little bit, and he just assumed that he heard me say it to him personally behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Like, this is an actual grievance.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm very happy with what's happening with Harold, though, on the program.
That's
I gotta
huge.
Say. Harold has been gangbusters.
Is he very Kantian? Sort of?
Well, Harold has far more, yes. Harold's read his Ralston, and so he can defend his utilitarianism better. The perception that these people have of the program is completely built upon what their algorithm is in terms of what they look at.
And only seen when we criticize them.
Exactly, which is fine. I mean, I don't watch all of Tim, but I don't make broad proclamations. I have no idea. It's quite possible that Tim has experts on the Supreme Court on his show with the same regularity that we do. Yeah. It's quite possible that Tim has experts on public policy on his show with the regularity that we do. He could have, for all I know, he could be doing a deep dive into the implications of Reconstruction or the implications of I can't even remember what we talked about with Cowie, Professor Cowie, just 2 days ago. I mean,
limits of Keynesianism.
Or he could be. I know he's very much into the working class, and he could be talking to people about austerity as a function of a feature, not a bug of capitalism. He could be doing this. So I don't make any broad proclamations about what his show covers or not. Granted, every time we tune in, maybe it's just he feels more comfortable talking to people like the Hodge twins. I don't know who they are, or like the head of the Proud Boys, or Crowder,
in the middle of
or whatever it is, or
breakdown.
Kanye, or whatever it is.
Yeah,
that's when we tune in more. So I understand that's a limit that we have. But if Tim really wants to have a conversation about the Supreme Court, I'd be happy to have a conversation about the Supreme Court, about any of it. And he can go on and lie about, like, he's offended how I ruined everything with Crowder, or it was because I wouldn't go in the middle of COVID into his studio. But that's that. But I mean, Tim is, now I just know that next time I'm complaining about what's happening in my my burgeoning voiceover career, I don't go to Tim because he spills the beans. And now, you got Benjamin running around now telling everybody too.
It's a feud.
It's crazy. It's really crazy.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. Finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive